Hey guys, it's Dr. E with AminoTherapist.com. So, my student asked me a question today and I thought it was a pretty good question. Why wouldn't you do an anterior pelvic tilt before a repeated extension and standing? So, I've heard this instructed before and I don't find this really as effective because actively, when you do an anterior pelvic tilt, you're actually co-contracting hip flexors and back extensors. Now, as much as possible, any kind of repeated end range loading strategy or set is supposed to be as passive as possible. And even though you're not really as passive in weight bearing or a standing position, it's still more passive. And you'll find if you try it, if you do the anterior pelvic tilt first, you're actually going to contract your erectors and then actually load your lumbar spine a bit more. And there's a difference between passive end range loading and active. Active is not as great as passive. There's always a there's always a greater joint play to passive range of motion. And active, you're not going to go as far. So try it yourself. Try an anterior pelvic tilt actively, and then go into repeated extension and standing, and then go into just stand up normally with a mild lordosis, place your palms in your back, and try to lean back as far as you possibly can. I think you'll notice a difference, and that's why I instruct it with just leaning back and possibly with the hips, either the front of the hips on the table and the back, or the back of the hips on the table, and it makes for a better end range loading strategy. Anterior tilt, I'm getting some approximation, and that doesn't really feel comfortable. Just feels like a very uncomfortable compression. Now, if I stand in my neutral, which is still probably more of an anterior pelvic tilt than most people have, I can go back quite a bit further. And this is really, it's passive because I'm just leaning back. And you know, this way I could almost dodge bullets. But actively, if I'm contracting my hip flexors and my erectors, I can't really go back as far, and it's not as comfortable. So if you can't get to end range, it's not going to be as good of a set.